The first cries, how our ancestors brought life into an ancient world. Listen, can you hear it through the endless corridors of time? That first sharp intake of breath, cutting through the silence of a cave where shadows dance against stone walls painted with ochre handprints of mothers long forgotten, where the wind carries whispers of labor cries that echoed 40,000 years ago across landscapes we can barely imagine, where fire crackled against the darkness and women gathered in circles of wisdom passed down not through written word but through the sacred knowledge held in weathered hands and knowing eyes that had witnessed the miracle and terror of birth in a world where every sunset might be the last, where predators stalk just beyond the ring of firelight and the simple act of bringing new life into existence required a courage so profound that it still courses through your veins today like an ancient river of memory. In the flickering amber light of that primordial scene, imagine the weight of what it meant to carry life when there were no hospitals, no sterile instruments, no understanding of infection or anatomy beyond what could be learned from necessity and observation, when the only anesthesia was the grip of calloused hands and the rhythm of ancient songs hummed low and steady through the hours of labor, when birth and death danced so closely together that every successful delivery was nothing short of a miracle negotiated with forces that seemed both divine and merciless. What did it feel like, do you think, to be the first conscious beings on Earth, to understand that the life growing within could be nurtured, protected, coaxed safely into a world that offered no guarantees, where the very act of walking upright had narrowed the birth canal and made human delivery one of the most dangerous events in the natural world? Yet somehow, through countless generations of accumulated wisdom and desperate innovation, our ancestors not only survived but found ways to thrive, passing down through blood and bone and whispered instruction, the knowledge that would eventually lead to this moment, where you sit in safety and comfort, contemplating the extraordinary journey that brought you here. Before we begin this journey into the deepest reaches of human experience, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from, and at what time of day you're joining me for this exploration of our most ancient and universal story. Deep beneath the earth, where sunlight has never touched the walls, where silence hangs thick as velvet, and the air tastes of minerals and ancient secrets, archaeologists have discovered something extraordinary in caves scattered across Europe, Africa, and Asia, spaces that were clearly designated, prepared and used specifically for the act of bringing new life into the world, chambers where the detritus of countless births still lies buried beneath millennia of sediment, telling stories written in bone fragments, stone tools worn smooth by desperate hands, and the fossilized remains of medicinal plants that grew nowhere near these underground sanctuaries, yet were somehow transported here, carried by women who understood their power in ways that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Picture yourself descending into one of these sacred spaces, perhaps in what is now southern France, 45,000 years ago, when the world outside was locked in the grip of an ice age and survival meant understanding every nuance of shelter, warmth and protection. The entrance is narrow, requiring you to crawl on hands and knees, your body instinctively recognizing the symbolic return to the womb that this passage represents, and as you emerge into the larger chamber beyond, your eyes adjust to reveal walls marked with handprints, not random or decorative, but placed with intention around natural formations in the rock that suggest the curves of a pregnant belly, the opening of a birth canal, the protective embrace of the Earth Mother herself. Here, generations of women came when their time drew near, guided by the elder mothers who knew which herbs to burn to cleanse the air, which positions the cave walls and natural ledges could support during the long hours of labor, how the acoustics of the underground chamber would amplify their voices in songs and chants designed to regulate breathing, manage pain, and call upon whatever divine forces might be listening to grant safe passage to both mother and child. These were the world's first delivery rooms, chosen not for convenience but for their spiritual significance, their protection from predators and weather, their connection to the deep earth that was seen as the ultimate source of all fertility and life. The evidence suggests that these caves were used continuously for thousands of years, each generation adding to their sacred nature, and when we examine the bone tools found within them, we see implements worn smooth by use, shaped by necessity into forms that could cut umbilical cords, clear airways, assist in difficult deliveries, and perform the countless small tasks that birth requires. But more than tools, these caves held something equally important: the accumulated spiritual power of all the births that had taken place within them, the sense that here, in this specific place, the boundary between life and death was thin enough that new souls could slip through safely, protected by the prayers and presence of all the mothers who had labored here before. In some caves we find evidence of elaborate preparation rituals, floors cleared and lined with soft materials that must have taken weeks to gather and prepare, fire pits positioned to provide warmth without filling the chamber with smoke, water sources carefully maintained and protected, and most mysteriously, patterns of objects arranged around the birthing area that suggest complex beliefs about the spiritual dimensions of birth, the need to create a sacred circle of protection, to invoke specific powers or entities, to ensure that the child being born would be welcomed not just by its immediate family, but by the entire community of ancestors whose spirits were believed to inhabit these underground sanctuaries. What strikes modern researchers most profoundly is the sophistication of understanding these arrangements reveal. Our ancestors clearly recognized that birth was not simply a biological event but a profound transformation that required physical, emotional, and spiritual support, that the environment in which a child entered the world would shape not only its chances of survival but its fundamental relationship to existence itself, and so they created these spaces with the same care and attention that they might devote to preparing for a hunt that would feed the entire tribe or defending against an attack that threatened everyone they loved. The sacred caves remind us that even in the harshest conditions imaginable, when daily survival required every ounce of energy and attention, our ancestors still understood that some experiences transcend the merely practical, that bringing new life into the world deserves ceremony, reverence, and the very best that a community can offer, and perhaps most remarkably, they understood that birth is not something women do alone, but a sacred act that requires the support, wisdom, and presence of the entire community, especially the elder women who had walked this path before and lived to share their knowledge. In the grey hour before sunrise, when the world exists in that liminal space between night and day, when even the most restless members of the tribe still lie wrapped in fur and dreams, imagine her waking to a sensation she has felt building for days, but which now arrives with unmistakable urgency. The tightening across her belly that signals the beginning of a journey that will test every survival skill her people have developed over countless generations, every piece of wisdom carefully preserved and passed down through the sacred bond between mothers and daughters, every prayer and ritual designed to negotiate safe passage through the valley of shadows that every birth must traverse. She is perhaps 16 years old, though age in her world is measured not in calendar years but in seasons survived, in knowledge accumulated, in the gradual transition from child to woman to mother that marks the true milestones of prehistoric life. Her body, strengthened by constant movement across vast landscapes in search of food and shelter, carries this pregnancy with the resilience that only comes from a lifetime of physical challenge. Yet she knows from watching other women in her tribe that strength alone will not be enough to guarantee the safe arrival of the life growing within her. The first contractions come irregularly, spaces of relief between waves of intensity during which she continues with the morning tasks that structure her daily existence. Gathering fuel for the fire, checking the snares that might have captured small game during the night, preparing the simple foods that will sustain her family through another day of uncertain survival. But gradually, inevitably, the waves grow stronger and closer together, demanding her full attention, requiring her to stop whatever she is doing, and breathe deeply through the mounting pressure that seems to originate not just in her body, but in some cosmic force beyond her understanding or control. Her husband, if she has one, or the other adults in her family group, recognize the signs even before she speaks them aloud. There is something unmistakable about the way a woman in early labor moves, pauses, breathes, that alerts the community to what is beginning, and immediately the ancient protocols swing into action, plans that have been discussed and refined since the first moment her pregnancy became obvious. Arrangements that take into account not just her immediate needs, but the vulnerability that birth creates for the entire group. The necessity of maintaining normal survival activities while also dedicating the necessary resources to ensuring a successful delivery. If they are currently traveling, the decision must be made whether to stop here, wherever here happens to be, or to push forward toward a known birthing place. Perhaps one of those sacred caves or a seasonal campsite where other women in the tribe have successfully delivered in the past. The timing of labor rarely accommodates human plans, and our ancestors learned to balance the risks of giving birth in an unprepared location against the dangers of forcing a woman in active labor to continue traveling over terrain that might be treacherous, exposed, or far from water sources. As the mourning progresses and her labor intensifies, she begins to understand why the elder women of her tribe speak about birth with such a mixture of reverence and fear, why the successful delivery of a healthy child is celebrated with the same intensity as a successful hunt or the discovery of a new source of fresh water. This is not simply the biological process that modern medicine has made it seem, but a profound encounter with forces that dwarf human understanding, a negotiation with powers that can grant life or death seemingly at random, requiring not just physical strength but spiritual preparation, community support, and a kind of surrender to the unknown that challenges every survival instinct. The pain, when it comes in full force, is unlike anything she has experienced, even in a life that has known hunger, cold, injury, and the constant stress of uncertainty. This pain has purpose, rhythm, intelligence, building and receding like waves against a shore, each contraction bringing the child closer to the threshold between worlds, and she begins to understand why labor is spoken of not as suffering but as work, the hardest and most important work that any human being can undertake, requiring skills that cannot be learned through observation or instruction, but must be discovered in the moment, through instinct, intuition, and the deep wisdom that seems to emerge from the body itself when survival depends upon it. Around her, the women of her tribe prepare for what may be a journey lasting hours or days, gathering the materials that experience has taught them will be needed, creating the physical and spiritual space that birth requires, while the men and children take on the additional responsibilities of hunting, gathering, and protection that will be necessary while the community's attention is focused on this most fundamental act of human continuity. In this moment, as the sun rises fully and her labor moves into its active phase, she becomes the vessel through which 40,000 years of human survival flows toward an uncertain future, carrying within her body not just one new life, but the hopes and dreams of everyone who depends upon the next generation for their ultimate survival. As her labor deepens and the contractions demand more of her attention than anything else in the world, she finds herself surrounded by a circle of faces that represent the accumulated wisdom of countless births, successful and tragic, that have shaped her tribe's understanding of how to navigate this most dangerous and sacred passage. These are the women who have stood in her place, who have felt the same overwhelming forces building within their own bodies, who have learned through experience and observation which herbs can ease pain, which positions might help a difficult birth progress, which signs indicate danger, and which suggest that all is proceeding as nature intended. Her own mother moves closest, hands worn smooth by decades of work now gentle as they stroke her daughter's hair, her voice low and steady as she begins the songs that have accompanied birth in their lineage for generations beyond memory, melodies without words that seem to rise directly from the earth itself, rhythms that match the natural patterns of breathing and contraction, sounds that connect this moment to every other moment when a woman of their blood has labored to bring new life safely into the world. In her mother's eyes she can see both pride and fear, the recognition that this initiation into full womanhood cannot be completed for her by anyone else, that despite all the support and wisdom surrounding her, ultimately she must find within herself the strength to complete this ancient task. The eldest woman in the group, perhaps her grandmother or great-aunt, sits nearby with hands that have caught more babies than anyone can count, fingers still nimble despite their age, eyes still sharp enough to read the subtle signs that indicate how the birth is progressing, whether intervention might be needed, what complications to watch for in the hours ahead. She carries in her memory the stories of difficult births and easy ones, the techniques that worked and those that failed, the delicate balance between helping and interfering that can mean the difference between life and death for both mother and child. Other women of childbearing age arrange themselves around the circle, some tending the fire that will provide warmth and light throughout the night if necessary, others preparing the foods and teas that will help maintain her strength during the long work ahead. all of them acutely aware that they are witnessing and participating in the fundamental act upon which the survival of their people depends. For in a world where childhood mortality is high and many women die in childbirth, every successful birth represents a victory against the forces that would end their genetic line, their cultural traditions, their accumulated knowledge of how to survive in a world that offers no guarantees. Between contractions, when she can focus on something other than the overwhelming sensations in her body, she notices how the women move around her with practiced efficiency, each knowing her role without discussion or direction, their actions coordinated by understanding gained through participation in dozens of other births, their attention focused entirely on creating the conditions that will give her and her child the best possible chance of surviving this ordeal. There is something profoundly comforting about being held within this circle of female wisdom, knowing that every woman here has either experienced what she is going through, or will face it herself in the future, that this is not an individual struggle but a shared initiation into the deepest mysteries of existence. As her labor intensifies, the women begin to share their own birth stories, not to distract her but to remind her that what she is experiencing, however overwhelming it might feel, is part of the universal experience of womanhood, that countless mothers before her have felt exactly these sensations, this fear, this anticipation, this strange combination of surrender and fierce determination that labor requires. They speak of their own children, some now grown and parents themselves, others lost to the harsh realities of prehistoric life, but all remembered with the special tenderness that comes from having fought to bring them safely into the world. The circle of women serves not only practical purposes, but spiritual ones as well, creating a sacred space within which the miracle of birth can unfold safely, protected from the negative energies that might threaten either mother or child, surrounded by positive intentions, prayers, and the accumulated power of feminine wisdom. In their worldview, birth is not simply a physical event but a moment when the boundary between the seen and unseen worlds becomes permeable, when spiritual forces must be carefully managed to ensure that what crosses from one realm to the other brings blessing rather than harm. And so they maintain their vigil, these women who understand that birth is both the most natural thing in the world and the most dangerous, who know that their presence, their knowledge, their unwavering attention and support can mean the difference between celebration and tragedy, who carry within themselves the responsibility for ensuring that the ancient knowledge of how to bring life safely into the world continues to pass from generation to generation, preserved not in books or formal instruction, but in the sacred bond between women who share the fundamental experience of creating and nurturing life. Long before the first missed menstrual period confirms what her body already knows, she begins to notice the subtle changes that the elder women have taught her to recognize as the earliest signs of pregnancy, the way certain smells that once seemed pleasant now trigger waves of nausea, the strange metallic taste that appears in her mouth when she wakes in the morning, the unusual tenderness in her breasts that makes even the soft touch of fur against her skin uncomfortable, and perhaps most significantly, the deep sense of knowing that seems to arise from somewhere beyond conscious thought, an intuitive awareness that her body has begun the most fundamental transformation possible. In a world without pregnancy tests or ultrasounds, without calendars to track missed periods or medical examinations to confirm conception, the ability to read these early signs represents crucial survival knowledge, for pregnancy in the prehistoric world requires immediate adjustments to diet, activity, and risk-taking behavior that could mean the difference between a healthy birth and tragic loss. The women of her tribe have developed sophisticated methods of observation and interpretation that rival modern medical diagnostics in their accuracy, based on thousands of years of careful attention to the ways the female body signals its changing condition. Her mother and the other experienced women watch her carefully during these early weeks, noting changes in appetite and energy levels, observing how she responds to different foods and activities, paying attention to alterations in her skin tone, hair texture, and general demeanor that might indicate not only pregnancy, but how the pregnancy is progressing. They know that every woman carries pregnancy differently, that what might be normal for one could signal problems for another, and so they maintain constant but subtle surveillance, ready to offer guidance, support or intervention as circumstances require. As the weeks pass and her condition becomes more obvious, The women begin teaching her how to monitor her own pregnancy using techniques passed down through generations of mothers. She learns to pay attention to the patterns of nausea and fatigue, understanding that while some discomfort is normal, certain symptoms might indicate serious problems requiring immediate attention. She learns to feel for the subtle changes in her abdomen that indicate the growing child's position and development, and most importantly, she learns to trust the deep bodily wisdom that evolution has programmed into every pregnant woman, the instinctive knowledge of what foods to eat, what activities to avoid, what positions feel most comfortable as her body adapts to accommodate new life. The experienced women share with her the accumulated wisdom of their culture regarding pregnancy management, knowledge that encompasses not only physical care, but spiritual and emotional preparation as well. They teach her which plants and herbs can safely relieve the discomforts of pregnancy, and which must be avoided at all costs because of their potential to cause miscarriage. They show her exercises and positions that will help maintain her strength and flexibility while protecting the developing child, and they begin the long process of preparing her mentally and emotionally for the challenges that lie ahead. Without modern instruments to measure fetal heart rate or growth patterns, the women rely on techniques that seem almost mystical but which have been refined over millennia of practical application. They place their hands on her belly to feel for movement and position. They listen carefully to the sounds her body makes. They observe the way she walks and carries herself as indicators of the child's development, and they pay close attention to her dreams and intuitions, believing that pregnant women have enhanced sensitivity to information that comes from sources beyond ordinary consciousness. As her pregnancy progresses, they teach her to prepare for birth not just physically but mentally and spiritually, sharing stories of successful births and the techniques that made them possible, warning her about potential complications and how they might be managed, helping her develop the mental toughness and spiritual resilience that will be necessary to complete the dangerous journey of bringing new life into the world. They understand that birth begins long before the first contraction, that the months of pregnancy are a time of preparation that can determine the outcome of labor and delivery. Most importantly, they help her understand that pregnancy is not simply something that happens to her but something she actively participates in, that her choices, her attitude, her spiritual preparation can all influence the health and development of her child, that she has both the power and the responsibility to create the best possible conditions for new life to flourish. This represents a sophisticated understanding of the mind-body connection in pregnancy that modern medicine is only beginning to fully appreciate, ancient wisdom preserved through the careful observation and thoughtful interpretation of countless generations of women who understood that bringing healthy children into the world requires far more than simply waiting for nature to take its course. Among the women who gather around her as labor intensifies, one figure stands apart, not by virtue of age alone, but because of the accumulated knowledge that flows through her weathered hands like an invisible river of ancient wisdom. She is the keeper of secrets that cannot be written down or formally taught, understanding that exists in the space between instinct and experience, techniques that have been refined through countless births and passed from master to student through demonstration, observation, and the kind of learning that can only happen when life and death hang in the balance, and every decision carries profound consequences. This woman, whom we might call the first midwife though she would not have known that term, learned her skills not in schools or from textbooks, but through years of apprenticeship to other wise women, beginning as a young girl by observing births from the edges of the sacred circle, gradually being allowed closer as she demonstrated the temperament, intuition, and dedication necessary to take on such enormous responsibility. She has felt the pulse of life through countless abdomens, has guided struggling babies through difficult passages, has held dying mothers in her arms, and somehow found ways to coax them back from the threshold, has developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when intervention is needed, and when the wisest course is simply to wait and trust the ancient processes that have brought every human being who has ever lived safely into the world. Her hands know things that no modern medical textbook could teach: how to feel through layers of muscle and tissue to determine a baby's position, how to sense when the cervix is ready to allow passage, how to distinguish between the normal pain of productive labor and the dangerous pain that signals complications requiring immediate action. She can read the language written in a woman's breathing patterns, her skin tone, the sounds she makes during contractions, interpreting subtle signs that indicate whether labor is progressing normally or moving toward crisis, whether mother and child are both handling the stress of birth within acceptable limits, or whether emergency measures must be taken to prevent tragedy. When complications arise, as they inevitably do in a certain percentage of births, she becomes the thin line between life and death, drawing upon knowledge accumulated through decades of experience to make split-second decisions about interventions that carry their own risks, but which may be the only hope for saving mother, child, or both. She knows how to turn a breached baby, how to manage a cord wrapped around the neck, how to assist when labor stalls or progresses too quickly, how to control bleeding and prevent infection using only the materials that nature provides and the techniques that generations of desperate innovation have developed. But her knowledge extends far beyond the purely technical aspects of delivery. She understands the crucial importance of the emotional and spiritual dimensions of birth, knowing how to calm a panicking mother, how to maintain confidence and hope even in the most difficult circumstances, how to create the psychological conditions that allow a woman's body to do what evolution has programmed it to do, how to work with the natural forces of birth rather than against them. She has learned that fear and tension can literally prevent labor from progressing normally, that a woman who feels safe, supported, and confident is far more likely to have a successful birth than one who is frightened or stressed. Her presence alone often seems to make the difference between an easy birth and a difficult one, not because she possesses magical powers, but because she radiates the calm confidence that comes from having successfully navigated hundreds of similar situations, because she knows from experience that most births, even complicated ones, can have positive outcomes if managed with skill, patience, and wisdom. Her very demeanor communicates to the laboring woman that she is not alone, that someone with the knowledge and experience necessary to guide her safely through this ordeal is present and committed to her well-being. She carries within her memory not just the techniques of successful birth management, but the stories of every birth she has attended, learning from each experience something that might prove valuable in future situations, gradually developing an almost encyclopedic knowledge of the countless variations and complications that human birth can present. She knows which herbs can strengthen contractions and which can slow them down when necessary, which positions might help a stalled labor progress, how to construct simple tools from available materials that can assist in difficult deliveries, how to recognize the signs that indicate when a birth is beyond her abilities and requires whatever more drastic interventions might be possible in a world without hospitals or surgical facilities. Most importantly, she understands her role as the bridge between the ancient knowledge of successful birth management and the next generation of women who must learn these skills to ensure the survival of their people. She watches carefully for young women who show the aptitude and dedication necessary to become her successors, gradually sharing with them the accumulated wisdom of her profession, knowing that the survival of future generations depends upon preserving and transmitting this crucial knowledge through the unbroken chain of women who have dedicated their lives to bringing new life safely into the world. As her contractions intensify and the waves of pain begin to demand every ounce of her strength and attention, the wise women around her reach for knowledge that stretches back through countless generations of careful observation, experimentation, and desperate innovation. In leather pouches worn smooth by constant handling, they carry the dried leaves, roots, bark, and seeds of plants whose properties have been discovered through millennia of trial and error, passed down through the sacred lineage of healers who understood that nature provides not only the challenge of birth but also the tools necessary to meet that challenge with courage, endurance, and hope. The first remedy they offer her comes from the willow tree, whose inner bark, when stripped, dried, and chewed, releases compounds that modern science would eventually isolate and synthesize as aspirin, but which our ancestors knew simply as the gift that could take the sharp edge off pain without dulling the mind or interfering with the natural processes of labor. They have learned through careful observation that pain relief during birth must be balanced against the need to maintain the strength and awareness necessary to participate actively in delivery, that while some discomfort is inevitable and even necessary, overwhelming pain can exhaust a woman beyond her ability to complete the work that only she can do. From their precious stores they also draw preparations made from the passion flower, whose delicate purple blooms belie the powerful calming properties contained within its leaves and stems. When brewed into a gentle tea and sipped slowly between contractions, it brings a subtle relaxation that allows her muscles to work more efficiently, reducing the tension that can impede labor's progress while maintaining the alertness and strength she will need in the hours ahead. The women understand that birth is not simply a matter of enduring pain but of working skillfully with the body's natural rhythms, and these plant allies help create the internal conditions that allow cooperation rather than conflict between conscious intention and unconscious process. For the nausea that often accompanies intense labor, they turn to ginger root, carefully preserved from trading expeditions to distant lands where this precious plant grows wild. Understanding that its ability to settle the stomach and restore appetite can mean the difference between a woman who maintains her strength throughout a long labor and one who becomes too weak to complete the final, most demanding stages of birth. They have learned to prepare it in multiple forms, fresh when available, dried and powdered when necessary, always carried as part of the essential medicines that any group must possess to successfully manage the medical emergencies that arise in a world without hospitals or professional medical care. But perhaps their most treasured remedy comes from red raspberry leaves, which when gathered at the proper season and carefully dried retain properties that seem almost magical in their ability to strengthen and coordinate uterine contractions, helping labor progress more efficiently while reducing the total time and energy required for delivery. This knowledge represents thousands of years of careful observation and experimentation, countless generations of women noting which plants seemed to help difficult labors and which appeared to cause harm, gradually developing a sophisticated pharmacopoeia of natural birth aids that rivals anything modern medicine has developed. The preparation and administration of these plant medicines involves as much ritual and ceremony as practical application, for the women understand that healing involves not just the physical properties of the plants themselves, but the spiritual dimensions of their gathering, preparation and use. They know which phase of the moon is optimal for harvesting different medicines, which prayers or songs should accompany their preparation, how to create the sacred space necessary for their most powerful effects. Understanding that the boundary between medicine and magic is far thinner than modern thinking suggests, that intention, ritual and spiritual preparation can enhance or diminish the effectiveness of even the most potent natural remedies. Beyond pain relief, their plant knowledge extends to medicines that can address the various complications that might arise during birth. They carry preparations that can help control bleeding, prevent infection, stimulate stalled labor or slow contractions that are coming too quickly, support a mother's strength when labor extends beyond normal limits, and provide the crucial nutritional support that might be necessary during and after the demanding work of bringing new life into the world. Each medicine represents not just botanical knowledge but hard-won understanding of the delicate balance between helping and interfering that can determine the outcome of any birth. As she drinks the bitter teas and chews the medicinal roots they offer her, she becomes part of an unbroken chain stretching back to the very beginning of human consciousness, connecting her to every woman who has ever faced the challenge of birth and reached for whatever help nature might provide. In accepting these ancient remedies, she places her trust not just in the specific effects of individual plants, but in the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of women who faced exactly the same fears, the same pain, the same uncertainty, and who somehow found ways not only to survive but to preserve and pass down the knowledge that might help their daughters and granddaughters navigate the same treacherous but ultimately miraculous passage from pregnancy to motherhood. As dawn breaks across the ancient landscape and her labor enters its final, most intense phase, the circle of women around her grows quiet with the focused attention that comes when everything they have learned, everything they have prepared for, everything their ancestors have passed down through generations of accumulated wisdom must now be brought to bear on this single crucial moment. The contractions that began as distant thunder have become an overwhelming force that seems to originate not just in her body, but in the very foundations of the earth itself, each wave building upon the last until she feels as though she is being transformed from woman into something else entirely. A vessel through which the fundamental creative power of the universe expresses itself in its most raw and primal form. The midwife positions herself where she can both observe and assist, her experienced hands ready to provide whatever help might be needed while her trained eye watches for signs of complications that would require immediate intervention. She has learned through decades of practice to read the subtle language written in the laboring woman's breathing, posture, and the sounds she makes, interpreting these signs to determine how the birth is progressing, whether mother and child are both handling the stress within acceptable limits, when to offer assistance, and when the wisest course is simply to wait and trust the ancient processes that have successfully completed billions of births over the course of human evolution. Between the crushing waves of final stage labor, she finds herself entering an altered state of consciousness that women throughout history have described in remarkably similar terms, a sense of leaving ordinary awareness behind and becoming part of something vast and timeless, connected not just to her own body, but to every woman who has ever labored to bring new life into the world, drawing strength from sources that seem to exist beyond individual will or determination, accessing reserves of endurance and courage that she never knew she possessed until this moment when nothing less than everything is required of her. The other women maintain their vigil with the intense focus of hunters tracking dangerous prey, understanding that birth can shift from routine to crisis in a matter of moments, that their attention, their prayers, their readiness to act, could mean the difference between celebration and tragedy. They watch her face for signs of exhaustion that might require intervention, monitor the progress of labor for indications that complications might be developing, stand ready to implement whatever emergency measures their collective knowledge suggests might be necessary to ensure that both mother and child survive this most dangerous passage. When the moment of crowning arrives and the child's head becomes visible, the atmosphere in the birthing space becomes electric with anticipation and tension. This is the moment when everything that can go wrong usually does, when the careful preparation and accumulated wisdom of the attending women will either prove sufficient to meet whatever challenges arise or be found inadequate in the face of complications that exceed their ability to manage. The midwife's hands hover ready to guide the child's shoulders through the final passage, to clear airways, to manage the umbilical cord, to respond instantly to whatever assistance might be needed in the crucial seconds that determine whether this birth will be added to the catalogue of successes or tragedies that every birth attendant carries in her memory. The final push requires her to summon every ounce of strength she possesses, drawing not just on her physical reserves but on the spiritual power that the women around her have helped create through their presence, their prayers, their unwavering commitment to seeing her safely through this ordeal. In this moment she understands why birth is spoken of not as something that happens to women but as something they do, work that requires skill, determination, and a kind of surrender to forces larger than individual will, a collaboration between conscious effort and unconscious wisdom that must be perfectly timed and coordinated to achieve success. And then, in a rush of fluid and relief that seems to empty her of everything she has ever been while simultaneously filling her with something entirely new, the child emerges into the firelight, small and wet, and utterly dependent, taking its first breath in a world that offers no guarantees but which has just received another member capable of carrying forward the extraordinary experiment of human consciousness. The midwife's trained hands work quickly to clear the tiny airways, to ensure that breathing begins normally, to check for obvious deformities or problems that might require immediate attention, while around the circle, the women release the tension they have carried for hours in exhaled prayers of gratitude and relief. The cutting of the umbilical cord with a sharp stone blade marks the child's first step toward independence, the severing of the physical connection that has sustained life for the past 9 months, and the beginning of the separate existence that will either flourish or fail based on countless factors beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. But in this moment, as the newborn's cries fill the ancient air and announce another successful completion of the journey from non-existence to life, the women allow themselves to believe that once again they have participated in the fundamental miracle that makes all human culture, achievement, and hope possible. In those first crucial moments after birth, as the infant lies wet and vulnerable in the flickering firelight, crying out its bewilderment at being thrust from the warm security of the womb into a world of cold air and uncertain futures, the experienced women move with practiced efficiency to provide the immediate care that will determine whether this new life will survive its first hours, days, and weeks in a prehistoric world where infant mortality claimed nearly half of all children before their first birthday. Their hands, guided by knowledge passed down through countless generations of mothers, work to clean, warm and assess this newest member of their community, while simultaneously monitoring the mother for signs of complications that could still prove fatal despite the successful completion of delivery. The midwife examines the tiny body with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate normal development versus the abnormalities that might compromise survival. She checks that the airways are clear and breathing is regular, that the heart rate is strong and steady, that all limbs are properly formed and responsive to stimulus, that the color is gradually changing from the blue-gray of birth to the pink that indicates adequate circulation, looking for any indication of the problems that could require immediate intervention, or which might suggest that this child will need special care to survive in an environment that tolerates no weakness or prolonged dependency. Meanwhile, the mother, exhausted from the ordeal of birth, but still alert with the adrenaline that accompanies any life-threatening experience, reaches for her child with an instinctive urgency that evolution has programmed into every successful mother. The immediate skin-to-skin contact serves multiple crucial functions, helping to regulate the infant's body temperature in a world without heated buildings or incubators, establishing the physical bond that will be essential for successful breastfeeding, and triggering the release of hormones that help both mother and child begin the complex process of attachment that makes the enormous investment of energy required to raise a human child seem not only worthwhile but imperative. The other women work to create the protected environment that a newborn requires, building up the fire to ensure adequate warmth, preparing soft furs and carefully cleaned materials to serve as the first clothing and bedding, organizing the foods and medicines that will be necessary to support the mother's recovery and her ability to produce the rich milk that represents the child's only reliable source of nutrition for the months ahead. They understand that successful birth is only the first challenge, that keeping a newborn alive long enough to develop the physical resilience necessary for survival in their harsh world requires constant vigilance, specialized knowledge, and the coordinated effort of the entire community. The first feeding becomes a critical test of the newborn's viability and the mother's ability to provide adequate nourishment. They watch carefully as the infant learns to latch onto the breast, noting whether the sucking reflex is strong and coordinated, whether the mother's milk production seems adequate, whether the feeding process proceeds smoothly, or reveals problems that might indicate underlying health issues. In a world without alternative sources of infant nutrition, successful breastfeeding is literally a matter of life and death, and any problems that interfere with this crucial process must be addressed immediately, with whatever interventions their traditional knowledge suggests might be effective. Beyond the immediate physical needs, the women also attend to the spiritual and cultural aspects of welcoming a new life into their community. They perform whatever rituals their tradition prescribes for acknowledging the child's arrival, for asking the protection of whatever deities or ancestral spirits they believe watch over human affairs, for formally accepting this new person as a full member of their group with all the rights and protections that membership entails. They understand that survival depends not just on physical care, but on the child's integration into the complex web of relationships and responsibilities that hold their society together. As the hours pass and the immediate crisis of birth gives way to the ongoing challenge of infant care, the women begin teaching the new mother the countless skills she will need to keep her child alive and healthy, how to recognize the signs of illness or distress, how to adjust feeding schedules based on the child's needs and her own recovery, how to provide the constant physical contact and stimulation that promotes healthy development, how to protect the vulnerable infant from the infections, injuries, and environmental hazards that pose constant threats in their world, and how to balance her attention to the new baby with her other responsibilities to family and community. The survival of this newborn, like that of every child born into the prehistoric world, depends ultimately on the accumulated wisdom of generations of mothers who have faced exactly the same challenges and somehow found ways to raise their children successfully, despite the enormous odds against survival. In accepting responsibility for this new life, the mother joins an unbroken chain of women stretching back to the very beginning of human consciousness, each link forged by the determination to pass life forward against all obstacles, creating through countless individual acts of love and sacrifice the continuous thread of existence that connects our ancient ancestors to every person alive today. But not every birth story ends with the joyful cries of a healthy newborn and the relieved exhaustion of a mother who has successfully completed the dangerous journey of bringing new life into the world in the harsh reality of prehistoric existence, where every aspect of survival balanced on the knife's edge between success and catastrophe. Maternal and infant mortality claimed a devastating toll that shaped not only individual families but entire communities, creating a constant undercurrent of grief and loss that influenced every aspect of how pregnancy and birth were understood, prepared for, and remembered within the collective memory of the tribe. Sometimes the signs of trouble appear early in labor, recognized by the experienced midwife as indicators that this birth may not follow the normal pattern that leads to successful delivery, bleeding that begins too early and continues too heavily, contractions that become irregular or stop entirely, changes in the mother's color or breathing that suggest her body is failing under the enormous stress of labor, or the subtle signs that indicate the child within has already been lost, and that the primary goal must now shift from successful delivery to saving the mother's life. In these moments, the accumulated wisdom of generations must be brought to bear in desperate attempts to salvage whatever victory might still be possible from what appears to be inevitable tragedy. When complications arise that exceed the midwife's ability to manage with traditional techniques, the gathered women face decisions that no human being should ever have to make, choosing between interventions that might save the child at the cost of the mother's life or procedures that might preserve the mother by sacrificing the infant. These choices, made in the flickering firelight with only seconds to decide, carry consequences that will ripple through families and communities for generations, creating wounds that never fully heal and wisdom that comes at a price almost too terrible to pay. The loss of a mother in childbirth represents not just personal tragedy, but a crisis that threatens the survival of her existing children, her partner, and the delicate balance of skills and knowledge that every prehistoric community required to maintain itself. Women in these societies carried responsibilities that could not easily be transferred to others: specialized knowledge of food preparation, childcare, medicine, and the countless domestic technologies that made survival possible. And when death claimed a mother, particularly one in her prime reproductive years, the entire group faced adjustments that could take years to accomplish and might never fully compensate for the loss. The death of an infant, while perhaps easier to accommodate practically, created its own profound grief and disruption within families and communities that understood children as the only form of social security available in old age, the carriers of genetic heritage and cultural knowledge, the justification for all the enormous effort and sacrifice that adult life required. Each infant death represented not just the loss of an individual but the failure of all the hopes, dreams, and plans that had been invested in that new life, forcing parents to confront the fundamental uncertainty of existence in a world where love and effort provided no guarantee of survival. The women who attended births carried within themselves the memory of every loss they had witnessed, tragedies that taught them crucial lessons about the signs of impending complications, the techniques that might prevent disaster, the limits of what human intervention could accomplish even with the best intentions and most skilled efforts. This knowledge, purchased with suffering and grief, became part of the precious inheritance passed down from master to student, ensuring that future generations might benefit from hard-won understanding of what could go wrong and how it might be prevented or managed. Communities developed rituals and practices designed to help families cope with the devastating losses that birth could bring, ceremonies that acknowledged the reality of grief, while also affirming the necessity of continuing to hope, to try again, to maintain faith in the possibility that future births might be more successful. They understood that the fear generated by witnessing or experiencing birth-related tragedies could itself become a factor that made future births more dangerous, and so they worked to process and integrate these experiences in ways that preserved useful knowledge while preventing paralyzing anxiety. The courage required to face pregnancy and birth in a world where maternal and infant mortality rates approached levels that modern minds can barely comprehend speaks to something profound about the human spirit, the determination to create and nurture life even when the odds suggest that such efforts are likely to end in heartbreak. These women, who continued to conceive and bear children despite having witnessed countless tragedies, who supported each other through losses that would have broken less resilient spirits, who found ways to honor their dead while continuing to hope for their living, represent perhaps the purest expression of the life force that drives all evolution, all progress, all the achievements that make human existence meaningful despite its fundamental uncertainty and fragility. In the days following a successful birth, when the immediate dangers have passed and both mother and child have demonstrated their ability to survive the crucial first hours of life together, the community begins the elaborate process of formally welcoming this new member into the complex web of relationships, responsibilities, and spiritual beliefs that define their shared existence. These rituals, refined over countless generations and invested with meanings that reach far beyond their surface actions, serve to integrate the profound disruption that any birth creates within the established order, transforming what began as a biological event into a social, cultural, and spiritual transformation that acknowledges the fundamental change that the arrival of new life creates for everyone involved. The first ceremony often takes place on the third day after birth, when traditional wisdom suggests that both mother and child have survived the most dangerous initial period and can be considered likely to continue living. The entire extended family gathers around the fire as the infant is formally presented to the community, held high so that all can see this newest addition to their number, while the elders speak aloud the child's lineage, connecting this small person to the long chain of ancestors whose blood flows through tiny veins, whose accumulated wisdom and survival skills have made this moment possible, whose spirits are believed to watch over and guide the development of their newest descendant. The naming ceremony that follows represents far more than simply choosing what the child will be called. Names in prehistoric societies carried power and meaning that modern cultures have largely forgotten, connecting the bearer to specific spiritual forces, ancestral protections, or desired qualities that the community hopes will manifest as the child grows and matures. The selection process might involve dreams, omens, consultation with spiritual advisors, or elaborate divination rituals designed to determine what name will provide the best possible foundation for a successful life in a world where identity and destiny are understood to be intimately connected. Special attention is paid to the spiritual protection of the newborn, who is understood to be particularly vulnerable during the first weeks of life, not only to physical dangers, but to malevolent spiritual forces that might seek to harm or steal away this new soul before it has become firmly anchored in the material world. Protective amulets are crafted from materials believed to have special power, prayers and incantations are spoken over the sleeping infant, rituals are performed to create spiritual barriers against negative influences, and the child is gradually introduced to the protective deities or ancestral spirits that watch over the family and community. The mother herself becomes the focus of ceremonies designed to acknowledge her transformation from woman to mother, recognizing that successful childbirth has initiated her into a new level of adult responsibility and spiritual power. She may undergo ritual purification designed to help her recover from the profound physical and spiritual changes that pregnancy and birth have created, receive special foods and medicines intended to support her healing and milk production, and be formally recognized as having achieved one of the most important accomplishments possible within her culture, the successful continuation of the genetic and cultural lineage that connects past, present, and future. Gift-giving plays a crucial role in these post-birth rituals as community members demonstrate their commitment to supporting the new family through the challenging months ahead. Practical gifts predominate, items that will help ensure the survival and well-being of both mother and child, but symbolic gifts are equally important, objects that acknowledge the spiritual significance of what has occurred and the hope that this new life will grow to make meaningful contributions to the community's survival and prosperity. These exchanges also serve to reinforce the social bonds that make cooperative survival possible, reminding everyone that raising children successfully requires the support and commitment of the entire group. The father, if he is present and acknowledged, participates in his own set of rituals designed to formally recognize his new responsibilities and integrate him into the changed family structure that the child's arrival has created. He may undergo symbolic trials or ceremonies that test his readiness to provide for and protect his expanded family, receive instruction from elder men about the skills and knowledge he will need to be an effective father, or participate in spiritual practices intended to connect him with the ancestral masculine powers that are believed to guide and protect families within their cultural system. As the days pass and these various ceremonies unfold, the community gradually adjusts to accommodate its newest member, making the practical and social changes necessary to ensure that this child will receive the care, protection, and education necessary for survival and eventual contribution to group welfare. Roles and responsibilities are redistributed, resources are reallocated, plans and expectations are modified to account for the presence of someone who will require years of investment before becoming capable of independent survival, demonstrating the remarkable adaptability and cooperation that allowed our prehistoric ancestors to successfully raise children under conditions that would challenge even modern societies with all their technological advantages and social support systems. Picture her moving across a landscape locked in the grip of an ice age, so severe that glaciers stretch across continents, and the very concept of warmth seems like a distant memory from some impossible dream. She is 7 months pregnant, her body heavy with the child she carries, yet she must keep pace with her family group as they follow the migration routes of the massive herbivores that represent their only reliable source of food, shelter, and the materials necessary for survival in a world where the margin for error has shrunk to almost nothing, and every decision carries consequences that could mean the difference between life and death for everyone she loves. The challenges of pregnancy during the Ice Age required adaptations and survival strategies that pushed human ingenuity and endurance to their absolute limits. The constant need for movement in search of food and shelter meant that pregnant women could not enjoy the rest and careful diet that modern medicine considers essential for healthy fetal development. Yet somehow these ancient mothers found ways not only to survive their pregnancies but to give birth to children robust enough to thrive in conditions that would challenge the survival skills of any modern human, even one equipped with advanced technology and unlimited resources. Her clothing, crafted from the hides and furs of animals killed by the men of her tribe, represents a sophisticated understanding of layered insulation and protection that rivals anything modern technology has developed. Multiple layers trap warm air close to her body, while allowing moisture to escape, preventing the deadly combination of wetness and cold that can kill within hours, while special attention has been paid to protecting her abdomen and the precious life growing within, using the softest and warmest materials available to create a microenvironment that shields the developing child from the harsh realities of the world into which it will soon be born. Food during the Ice Age presents challenges that go far beyond simple caloric needs. The limited variety of available nutrition sources means that pregnant women must be especially creative and resourceful in obtaining the vitamins, minerals, and proteins necessary for healthy fetal development, often relying on organ meats, bone marrow, and other nutrient-dense foods that modern palates might find unappetizing, but which provide concentrated nutrition essential for building healthy babies. Every meal represents the successful completion of a complex hunting, gathering, and preparation process that requires the coordinated efforts of multiple people and considerable knowledge of food preservation techniques. The psychological challenges of maintaining a pregnancy during the constant stress and uncertainty of Ice Age survival created additional burdens that these ancient mothers had to navigate without the emotional support systems that modern societies provide. The knowledge that their child would be born into a world of almost unimaginable hardship, where survival would require constant vigilance and where death from cold, starvation, injury, or predation remained constant possibilities, must have created anxiety levels that would be considered pathological by modern standards. Yet somehow these women found ways to maintain the hope and determination necessary to bring new life into such a challenging world. Shelter during pregnancy becomes even more critical when external temperatures can kill within minutes, and adequate protection from wind and weather requires constant attention and maintenance. The construction of temporary shelters that can be quickly assembled and disassembled as the group moves, yet which provide sufficient protection for a pregnant woman and eventually a newborn infant, represents a level of engineering sophistication that demonstrates the remarkable problem-solving abilities that extreme necessity can develop, using only materials that can be carried or gathered from the immediate environment. The timing of birth during Ice Age conditions required careful planning and considerable luck. Ideally, labor would begin when the group was temporarily settled in a location that offered good protection, adequate fuel for heating, access to water, and some prospect of remaining in place long enough for mother and child to recover sufficiently for travel. But the unpredictable nature of both human labor and animal migration patterns meant that many births occurred under circumstances that were far from optimal, requiring improvised solutions and extraordinary resilience from everyone involved. The infant mortality rates during Ice Age conditions must have been staggering even by prehistoric standards, as newborns faced not only the usual challenges of adapting to life outside the womb, but the additional stress of extreme cold, limited nutrition, constant travel, and exposure to infections and injuries that would have been easily treatable under more favorable circumstances. Yet the very fact that modern humans exist proves that enough of these Ice Age babies not only survived but thrived sufficiently to reproduce themselves, passing forward the genetic heritage and survival knowledge that eventually allowed our species to spread across the entire globe. The women who successfully raised children during the Ice Age represent perhaps the ultimate expression of maternal determination and ingenuity, finding ways to nurture and protect new life under conditions that challenged every aspect of human survival, developing techniques and knowledge that would be passed down through generations and eventually contribute to humanity's ability to adapt to virtually every environment on Earth. Their legacy lives on not only in our DNA but in the fundamental human capacity to find hope and meaning, even in the face of seemingly impossible challenges, to continue creating and nurturing life even when logic might suggest that such efforts are doomed to failure. The profound challenges that human birth presents, unique among all mammals in its difficulty and danger, represent not an evolutionary mistake, but a crucial adaptation that made possible everything we recognize as distinctly human, the same factors that make human childbirth so perilous, the narrow birth canal necessitated by upright walking, and the large brain size that allows for complex thought and culture, created a selective pressure that shaped not only our physical development but our social structures, our capacity for cooperation, our ability to learn and transmit knowledge, and ultimately our emergence as the dominant species on Earth, despite our apparent physical vulnerability compared to other large mammals. The evolutionary bargain that our ancestors struck, trading easy birth for the advantages of bipedalism and large brains, required compensatory adaptations that fundamentally altered the trajectory of human development in ways that continue to influence every aspect of our existence. Human infants are born in a state of neurological immaturity that would be considered premature in almost any other species, requiring extended periods of care and protection that demanded new forms of social organization, cooperative child-rearing strategies, and the development of communication systems sophisticated enough to coordinate the complex activities necessary for successfully raising helpless young in dangerous environments. The extended dependency of human children created evolutionary pressure for the development of pair bonding, extended family structures, and community cooperation that distinguished early human societies from those of our closest primate relatives. Successful child-rearing required not just maternal investment but paternal support, grandparental wisdom, and community resources that could only be mobilized through social structures based on reciprocity, shared responsibility, and long-term planning, laying the foundation for all subsequent human cultural development and technological achievement. The difficulty and danger of human birth also created strong selective pressure for the development of midwifery skills, medical knowledge, and the ability to learn from experience and transmit that learning to future generations. The women who survived multiple births and helped others do the same possessed knowledge that was literally a matter of life and death for their communities, creating one of the first specialized professions and establishing the precedent for the accumulation and transmission of technical expertise that would eventually lead to all forms of human science and technology. The neurological immaturity that makes human infants so vulnerable also provides the extended period of brain development that allows for the acquisition of complex language, abstract thinking, and cultural learning that distinguishes human intelligence from that of other species. Children born with more mature nervous systems would be less dependent, but also less capable of the extensive learning that human survival requires, suggesting that the apparent disadvantage of helpless infancy actually represents a crucial adaptation for developing the cognitive abilities that make human culture possible. The pain and risk associated with human birth created evolutionary pressure for the development of emotional bonds between parents and children, strong enough to motivate the enormous investment of time, energy, and resources that human child rearing requires. Species with easier birth and more independent offspring can afford weaker parental bonds, but humans needed emotional attachments powerful enough to sustain years of intensive caregiving, leading to the development of the complex emotional lives and capacity for love that we consider central to human experience. The social cooperation required for successful human birth and child rearing also drove the development of communication skills, empathy, and the ability to understand and respond to the needs of others that form the foundation of human moral and ethical systems. Communities that could effectively coordinate their efforts to support pregnant women, assist in difficult births, and collectively raise children had significant survival advantages over those that could not, gradually selecting for individuals with enhanced capacities for cooperation, altruism, and social intelligence. The knowledge and skills required for successful birth management created some of the first forms of human expertise and specialization, establishing the precedent for the division of labor and accumulation of technical knowledge that would eventually make possible all human technological and cultural achievements. The midwives and wise women who developed techniques for managing difficult births were among humanity's first scientists, using observation, experimentation, and logical reasoning to solve problems that could not be addressed through instinct alone, pioneering the methods of inquiry and knowledge transmission that continue to drive human progress today. Perhaps most profoundly, the shared experience of being born through difficulty and danger, of requiring extensive care and protection during our vulnerable early years, creates a fundamental human understanding of interdependence and mutual obligation that shapes our deepest values and aspirations. We are the species that knows, at a cellular level, that our individual survival depends upon the care and commitment of others, that bringing new life into the world requires courage, wisdom, and community support, and that the continuation of our kind depends not on individual strength, but on our collective ability to nurture and protect the most vulnerable among us. Lessons written so deeply into our evolutionary heritage that they continue to influence human behavior and values even in modern contexts far removed from the prehistoric conditions that originally shaped them. In the sterile corridors of modern hospitals where birth has been transformed from sacred ritual to medical procedure, where epidurals replace plant medicines and electronic monitors substitute for the intuitive wisdom of experienced midwives, the ancient knowledge of our prehistoric ancestors continues to express itself in ways both obvious and subtle. The doula who instinctively knows how to calm a panicking mother draws upon wisdom that stretches back 40,000 years. The woman who feels an overwhelming urge to move and change positions during labor follows instructions written in genes shaped by countless generations of mothers who survived birth by trusting their body's innate knowledge, and the universal human tendency to surround birth with ceremony and meaning reflects our species' deepest understanding that bringing new life into the world represents something far more profound than simple biological reproduction. The practice of skin-to-skin contact immediately after birth, now supported by extensive medical research demonstrating its benefits for temperature regulation, breastfeeding success, and parent-child bonding, represents the rediscovery of knowledge that our ancestors never lost, understanding that was preserved through generations not because someone wrote it down or conducted scientific studies, but because mothers who followed these instincts raised healthier children who were more likely to survive and reproduce. Modern medicine has spent decades proving what prehistoric women knew intuitively, that birth is not just about safely extracting a baby, but about establishing the complex biological and emotional relationships that successful child rearing requires. The current movement toward more natural birthing practices, the growing recognition that pain medication and medical interventions can sometimes interfere with the natural processes of labor and delivery, the renewed interest in midwifery care and home birth, all represent a return to approaches that our ancestors would have recognized instantly, not because modern women want to reject the genuine benefits of contemporary medical knowledge, but because something deep within us recognizes that birth is a process that has been refined over millions of years of evolution, and that works best when we learn to cooperate with rather than override the ancient wisdom encoded in our bodies. The herbs and plant medicines that traditional cultures have used for centuries to support pregnancy and ease childbirth are being rediscovered by modern science, which finds active compounds and physiological effects that validate knowledge preserved through oral tradition. Red raspberry leaf, ginger for nausea, willow bark for pain relief, and countless other botanical remedies represent a pharmaceutical heritage that was developed through direct observation and experimentation by women whose lives depended on finding effective treatments using only what nature provided, creating a body of medical knowledge that in some cases surpasses what modern synthetic drugs can accomplish. The emotional and psychological support systems that contemporary birth professionals recognize as crucial for successful labor, the understanding that fear and stress can literally prevent normal birth progression, the growing emphasis on creating calm, supportive environments for delivery, all reflect rediscovered appreciation for aspects of birth care that prehistoric communities understood instinctively. They knew that a woman surrounded by trusted, experienced supporters who radiated confidence and calm was far more likely to have an easy birth than one who felt frightened, alone, or surrounded by anxiety. And modern research has confirmed that emotional support can be as important as medical intervention in determining birth outcomes. The current recognition that birth practices vary dramatically across cultures, and that there is no single correct way to manage labor and delivery, reflects a return to the flexibility and adaptability that allowed our ancestors to successfully give birth under an enormous range of conditions and circumstances. Rigid adherence to standard protocols, while sometimes medically necessary, can interfere with the natural variability that makes each birth unique and requires individualized approaches based on careful observation and responsiveness to changing conditions rather than predetermined procedures. Even our modern understanding of the importance of breastfeeding, the recognition that human milk provides not just nutrition but immune protection, hormonal regulation, and the foundation for healthy development, represents scientific validation of knowledge that was never questioned by traditional cultures. Our ancestors understood that successful breastfeeding required community support, proper nutrition for nursing mothers, and social structures that protected the extended period of dependency that human infants require, creating systems of mutual aid and shared responsibility that modern societies are still struggling to replicate. The growing awareness that birth trauma can have lasting effects not just on mothers but on children, that the circumstances of our entry into the world may influence everything from our stress responses to our capacity for forming relationships, echoes ancient understanding that birth is a profound spiritual and psychological event whose effects ripple throughout an entire lifetime. Traditional cultures surrounded birth with protective rituals and healing practices because they understood intuitively what modern psychology is beginning to prove, that how we are born matters in ways that extend far beyond immediate physical survival. Perhaps most importantly, the persistent human recognition that birth deserves reverence, ceremony, and the very best that our communities can offer reflects values and priorities that have remained constant throughout our species' history, whether expressed through elaborate traditional rituals or contemporary practices like birth photography, baby showers, and extended parental leave. The impulse to mark the arrival of new life with celebration and support represents one of the most fundamental aspects of human nature, connecting us directly to every generation of ancestors who understood that successful reproduction requires not just individual effort but collective commitment to nurturing and protecting the future of our kind. As we reach the end of this journey through the deepest corridors of human experience, traveling from those first sacred caves where our ancestors gathered to bring new life safely into an ancient world, through the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of mothers who faced the universal challenges of pregnancy and birth with nothing but courage, community support, and the profound determination that has carried our species through every crisis and transformation in its long history, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of past and future, carrying within our own bodies and memories the living legacy of every woman who ever labored to ensure that human consciousness would continue its extraordinary experiment with existence on this small planet, spinning through infinite darkness. The women whose stories we have shared across these chapters, though separated from us by thousands of years and vast changes in technology, culture, and understanding, remain our contemporaries in the most fundamental sense. They faced the same fears, felt the same overwhelming love for their children, drew upon the same deep reserves of strength and wisdom that every mother discovers within herself when survival demands everything she has to give and more. Their victories become our heritage. Their losses teach us still. Their accumulated knowledge flows through our veins like an invisible river connecting every birth that has ever been to every birth that ever will be. In this age of unprecedented technological capability and medical advancement, when we have gained the power to peer inside the womb and monitor every aspect of fetal development, when we can predict and prevent many of the complications that claimed countless ancient lives, when pain relief and surgical intervention can address emergencies that would once have meant certain death, we have also gained something equally precious: the perspective to recognize and honor the extraordinary courage, ingenuity, and wisdom of those who came before us, who created the unbroken chain of successful births that made our own existence possible despite obstacles that would challenge even our modern capabilities. Their legacy lives on not only in our DNA, but in our deepest values and aspirations, in our recognition that birth represents something sacred that transcends mere biology, in our understanding that raising children successfully requires community commitment and support, in our instinctive knowledge that new life deserves the very best that any society can offer. These insights, tested across millennia of human experience, remain as relevant today as they were when our ancestors first gathered around fires in ancient caves and committed themselves to the profound responsibility of bringing consciousness safely into the world. If you found yourself moved by this exploration of our shared origins, if these ancient stories have helped you understand something new about the miracle of human existence and the extraordinary journey that brought each of us here, I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more journeys into the deepest mysteries of our past, and to share in the comments your own reflections on how these ancient echoes continue to resonate in your modern life. Until we meet again in the next exploration of the remarkable story of human survival and triumph, may you carry with you the strength, wisdom, and hope of all the mothers who walked this path before us, and may their courage inspire you to face your own challenges with the same determination that has carried our species through every trial and transformation in its long, extraordinary journey toward an unknown but always promising future.